I think we left off last week discussing, the problems of capitalism, and the capitalism is, a economic system that aims at profit, that and the profit has no relationship to human beings. So it occurred to me that in some ways, although capitalism as an economic system is very problematic, it's also brought enormous benefit to humankind. So, and in fact, that's true of virtually, everything.
Yeah.
Socialism, although a flawed economic system, also brought enormous benefit to humankind. Communism in the Soviet bloc, although it was a very flawed system, in some ways recognized the importance of human life and attempted to preserve the dignity of people. So you were guaranteed a right to work, you were guaranteed a right to eat, you were guaranteed a place to live. And those are important, human rights, which are lacking in our society. So there's, in some ways, always a mixed bag. And so I didn't finish, but I started reading Gardini's book, Power and Responsibility. And so he asks what power is. And, so is tornado power, is a storm power. They're not, they're natural forces. Power is not merely a natural force, but a planned direction. And so he says, when man's spirit is brought to bear upon the forces given by nature, an element of free choice enters the relationship. The spirit can direct them to whatever end it wills, and everything depends on whether this end is constructive or destructive, noble or base, good or evil. Then he argues that power involves responsibility, even though it often happens that nobody appears to be responsible or nobody wants to be responsible. Someone objectively,
yeah.
someone or some group objectively always is responsible. So in some ways that casts and I think the encyclical makes that argument at various points somewhat implicitly. So the problem, so the issue really is that in and of itself, these things are not inherently good or evil, but they're capable of being both good and bringing great good, and capitalism certainly has, and of bringing great evil. And here again, capitalism certainly has. So that's the economy. Then we have political structures where we have fundamentally, the same kind of issues operative, that political power tends to be self-protective. It often is exercised covertly, that it often serves to aggrandize, that it often serves to support those who have power.
It really affects a lot of people, the economy, and it affects the work, the employment, and all of that stuff. It's kind of like it's tied in, but not clearly. you know, when they're talking about the economy, I said, okay, well, when you listen to the news, they said that it tied in with the unemployment and all of that stuff. I don't know how. I listened to it. It goes, unemployment is so percent, and the economy is, is getting worse or something like that. So I said, well, I was thinking, how is the unemployment or employment tied in with the economy, the economic situation? So
How is how is employment tied to the economy?
yeah, the situation,
Unemployment.
yeah,
Unemployment.
unemployment and employment. The work, like a lot of people lost their job, right? So
Hmm.
what happened to the economy when something like that happened? So there's an
In well, in general, the economy uh, experiences a sharp decline.
yeah,
Although the stock market has continued to be very good, although the stock market is in a lot of ways um, atypical and not necessarily a very good measure. If remember the Reagan for much of the Reagan years, the economy
yeah,
was fairly terrible, and so with each new catastrophe, it seemed the stock market hit new highs. So
yeah,
the worse the economic news, the better the stock market. But so the problem is that capitalism as an economic system aims at making a profit. And the basic rule of the game, is that of capitalism is that if you don't make a profit, you're not going to be in business very long.
mm,
And so the effect is so particularly in that case, the effect of capitalism on humanity becomes unimportant. So if I'm losing money, I have to
yeah,
stay in business. So I have to do something to make a profit. So I have 10 people who work for me. Well, now if I half them, cut them in half, and
yeah,
make those five do the work of 10,
right,
then
yeah,
I'm going to be in much better condition and maybe I can survive.
mm,
So there's, in periods, and the problem is that capitalism as an economic system tends to be cyclical, so it has periods of boom followed by bust and
yeah,
periods of recovery and boom again. And in many ways, the periods of boom are integrally related to the periods of bust. So, there's prosperity, there's expansion. We talked last week about sort of the myth that resources are limited or
yeah,
unlimited, even though the irony is that everyone, including capitalism, recognizes that they're not, which creates contention for resources. But nevertheless, there's a real belief in both myths at the same time, even though they're contradictory. And the myth that everything is unlimited, that production, that raw materials are unlimited, that the market is unlimited, that production is unlimited, tends to give rise to overproduction. So you produce too much, and
yeah,
then and it's compounded by the fact that you always have to um, introduce new products and new improvements in your technologies and your products so that things become obsolete. So you're going to be left with a certain amount of obsolete stuff. Then you
yeah,
produce stuff that nobody actually wants, like say when Coca-Cola got rid of classic Coke and
yeah,
produced new Coke, which nobody liked. So
yeah,
they had to dump that and go back to classic Coke. So besides the fact that there's waste, there's also overproduction. And then when there's overproduction, the economy begins to collapse again.
I noticed too, though, even though there were quite a number of jobs lost, um, the the housing market was still doing really well.
I
And I
know.
wondered, what the heck? How come the housing market's doing well?
Yeah.
Well, apparently there are loans out there for less than 3% interest, so people are still buying houses
Right.
and they're going fast.
Yeah, you
So
can,
that helps the economy,
yeah, yeah. And also regionally, I mean, here, Microsoft is still expanding rapidly, and we don't have that much housing, just
And
kind of
Amazon too,
right.
right?
And Amazon too. Yeah, exactly.
And their businesses are booming because, everybody's not going out because of COVID, so they're ordering things
Right,
online.
right. Amazon is really booming. Google has a small presence here, but they're also booming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Boeing isn't, but that's more their decline is more than offset by Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, and no doubt other smaller tech companies. And ultimately, we really don't. The housing stock is fairly limited in on the east side, unless you can if you can say move to Duval, or not Duval, to Monroe, which is a rough commute to, like you
Yeah.
go to Seattle, or to Google in Kirkland, or Seattle, or Microsoft in Redmond, and or you can even further north, like moving to Snohomish, which is a really hard commute. So there's really limited housing stock. So that
Yeah. That
really
they said.
exerts an
So
upward
yeah,
pressure.
not
And
too many
here
stuff.
there's been a huge increase in home prices.
Yeah, even
Um,
here, there's a lot of people here in my complex that work for Microsoft in Redmond. And even in the Bay Area, people are leaving the Bay Area for Sacramento area.
yeah,
So because people are working from home.
right. Yeah,
So, I mean,
yeah,
it just,
Well,
it,
did you ever notice that when they're building houses, they're still building it and it's already sold? It's not even finished yet, and
yeah,
and it will say sold out. So you wonder, oh my goodness, where's all these people coming from?
yeah. And at the same time, I mean, well, that intensifies the problem of a lack of affordable housing, right?
Yeah,
So um, many people simply can't um, afford houses or living places at all, apartments, whatever. So that also exacerbates the problem of homelessness. Um, so, the underlying problem, in a system that produces for profit, is that it's profit that's important, and not really human beings. In some ways, capitalism is I think, a sort of a perfect case of uh, of what um, Pope Francis is talking about in terms of a paradigm that uh, makes humans objects rather than the primary actors. So the
yeah,
goal is to make profit. That can be done in periods when profit is under stress. There aren't going to be very many alternatives, and they're going to be largely negative in their implications. So you lay people off, and you stress more those who continue, still have their jobs. At the same time, as a society, we've lost, and I mean, this is probably true, at least in most of the first world, we've lost a sense of the dignity of work. So people who, do much of the work just aren't appreciated.
Yeah.
Labor isn't particularly appreciated. I was always, when I was working at Microsoft, I was always struck by the way the custodial staff was treated. They clean and, they
Yeah.
pick up the garbage and make sure that stuff is stocked in, the little kitchen on each floor, and they're mostly ignored. People
Yeah.
don't talk to them because, I'm an important person, and who is this person collecting the garbage?
Yeah.
Why do I want to do I don't want to
I,
have anything to
I
do
know.
with
I
that.
noticed that when I
I
worked for
don't I don't
yeah,
collect
the
garbage,
big
but
big corporation. Yeah.
but but they do the work.
Go on, let them go on
They,
strike, and then you'll
they don't.
find out how
They don't get
they are.
paid. They don't
Yeah,
get paid. Like minimum pay.
right. They got minimal pay. They were very
Yeah.
heavily people of color. They were very
And
heavily poor.
yeah, they work hard.
Very often, they didn't speak very good English. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, right. They work hard. They work conscientiously.
Yeah.
And you're right, Carmen. Just, I mean, wait till a garbage strike comes and see how
Yeah.
trivial and how degrading garbage collection is. It's an important
Exactly.
job. It's
Yeah.
people who collect our garbage should receive our thanks. All human labor is a dignified activity. All
Mhm.
workers should be treated with dignity. And so the
But I think
problem is that partly those who do the work are not properly the value of their contribution is not properly respected or valued. And the heads of large corporations are disproportionately rewarded, even though in many ways, it can be argued that many of them play the least significant role in the operation of their companies. And in many cases, they play a negative role in the operation of their companies. And yet they receive the money. We see that especially strikingly in the case of banks, where the people who manage the hedge funds and the investment funds receive enormous amounts of money, and yet looking at their overall records and performance, they're not very good. It's sort of in many ways a crapshoot, yet they get these millions of dollars. So the so partly there are the dynamics of the system which can tend to be anti-human, but there's also an issue of ethics. Gardini poses the problem of the question of power involves responsibility, and someone objectively must answer for it. So we saw when we were reading Genesis and the creation story, that a basic problem was that neither Adam nor Eve wanted to take responsibility, right?
Right.
It was all the snake's fault.
Yeah,
And
it's the serpent.
snake is snake, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you rob your neighbor's house, you can't blame the snake. But that's exactly what they did. And then, Cain was not his brother's keeper, even though he
Yep.
knew that he killed his brother,
Right. Yeah.
but refused to own up to it. And even though he knew that God knew he killed his
No.
brother.
Yeah. He, he still denied it.
So that's the second issue with capitalism. That's an issue with everything else, which is an issue with all human structures, that we tend to see, them as sort of independent entities. Like, for example, I remember when we first started going to one particular evangelical church, they had a little bookstore. I went in to look at the books, and they had one book about how capitalism was an economic system created by God, and it was, all good.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's ridiculous. I was totally shocked, indeed. So the thing is, we tend to see these economic structures, social structures, political structures as, sort of autonomous, independent, and in some sense good inherently. But they're not independent. In some sense, they are independent and autonomous, at least in relationship to us. They tend to be self-operating, but they're never inherently good.
Can
There's
it can it
always,
can it be though that the group that they were focusing on were ones that had just witnessed what communism has done to people, so um, they're trying to say that capitalism is good because it's got benefits that most that people didn't have a chance to
that,
have.
that's possible. I mean, but I don't think that. I mean, in this case, I don't think that was probably the the motivation of the person who wrote the book. I think he was simply being an apologist for capitalism. Um,
Okay.
but uh, but the problem, which is true of capitalism and then becomes true of everything else as well, is that the problem of responsibility, and that also involves an issue of ethics and and morality. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
given that capitalism is a system that aims at producing a profit, there are multiple approaches to making a profit. So we can uh, perform a service that's essential to somebody, and we can do it well, right? And because we're either performing an outstanding service or producing outstanding products that meet human need, we'll make a profit. That's some form of ethics in business, and applying ethics to capitalism. And then, there's the other view. Well, let's see, it cost me X dollars to build this house. If I use inferior concrete and laying the floor, I
Yeah.
can really save a lot of money. And if I buy some rotten lumber instead of, I could really save a lot more. And I'll
As long
try
as you
to,
don't get sued,
yeah,
right? I mean,
right.
seriously, there's so many legal suits out now. It's I don't think you can get away with that kind of thing.
Well, the problem is, it takes a while for many of those problems to surface, and in that time, you can be long gone, and then in a lot of cases it becomes unclear who's responsible and whose fault it is, um, and just what happened. So, but so there's a question of ethics, and often ethics are sorely lacking.
Mhm.
That's also true when we move to the political sphere. We saw, when Chernobyl happened, we saw
Yeah.
a huge problem with, ethics and self-protectiveness, and the the worsening of an already serious catastrophe that was really allowed to go unchecked before the Soviet Union asked for aid from other countries to try to get the nuclear catastrophe under control. We But we see it, that same protectiveness in everywhere else as well. So here we have issues of national security, which are very opaque, and so who really knows other than what we're told. So for example, we went to war in Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction,
Yeah.
which nobody ever found,
Yeah.
and
Nobody knows.
which intelligence suggested, didn't exist. Well, that's not completely true. The weapons of mass destruction that they were known to have were weapons of mass destruction that we had sold to them. We had sold them, particularly biological and chemical weapons of warfare, to use on the Iranians.
Oh my goodness.
And then remember, Saddam Hussein used them on his own people as well.
Right. Yeah.
But we had provided them, and the big problem with chemical and biological weapons is that they have a limited shelf life, and their shelf life had expired, which was known. So there was no basis for arguing that they had chemical and biological weapons or weapons of mass destruction. We knew they didn't, and yet we went to war because war was in our interest. So a
But they
basic
said the war
problem.
helps. Is that true? That war helps the economy if there's a war?
War helps the economy immensely unless it doesn't. If you it's a major boost to economic spending and jobs
Yeah.
if you win the war, or if you're waging a war more or less endlessly. I mean, Vietnam was very, very
Yeah.
profitable, for example. But then if when things really turn bad, and you lose the war, then it becomes an economic catastrophe. So for Nazi Germany, the war was economically very, very beneficial until they lost or began losing. And then, there were heavy, heavy bombings from the Allies from the West. There was the Red Army advancing from the East and really causing enormous destruction. And then, the fire bombings of Nuremberg and other Dresden and the other cities by the United States. And so, enormous destruction, enormous dislocations. So it's good if you're winning or you can have the damage done somewhere else, but not so good when it comes home. Then we have, the use of the monopolization of nuclear weapons. There's a really good study of the decision to use atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The usual argument is that without using them, we wouldn't have won, or we significantly shortened the war and saved, countless American lives. The moral problem with that argument is that it assumes that an American life is of greater value than a Japanese life. So that inherently becomes problematic. It also assumes that, the use of nuclear weapons by any standards is a crime against humanity because you're using it on a civilian population. And Western Christianity, since Augustine, has attempted to, if it's possible, to sort of rationalize and limit the damage done by warfare. So during the Middle Ages, the chivalry, and the code of knighthood, all of that originated with the church, and it was a basic. So the basic thinking behind it is that if two idiots in armor and lances want to go and kill one another, that's a vast improvement over their dragging in thousands of peasants to also get killed, right? So you limit the damage and you try to impose a code of chivalry on it, and fewer lives are lost as a result. So that has been a major focus of Christian activity since Augustine. And so here we have nuclear weapons, which are crimes against humanity, pure and simple. They're used indiscriminately against whomever is there. That by definition is a crime against humanity. So why was the decision made to, and so Japan had already, before the deployment of atomic weapons, had already indicated that they were willing to surrender.
Really?
Their one condition was that Emperor Hirohito be allowed to remain as emperor. And so that was viewed as unacceptable by the United States. It turns out that, in fact, he was allowed to remain as emperor. And so the real motivation, which was the result of the policies of Truman and Dean Acheson, who was then the Secretary of State under Truman, was to use the atomic weapons to cement America's position as the primary world power in the post-war period, and especially to threaten the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc countries, which at that point were not known to have nuclear weapons. So basically it becomes a means of nuclear blackmail.
Jeez.
And so we always have those kinds of immoral kind of calculations that inevitably result in a loss of human life. And political states do that. I mean, today we have a huge problem in the United States with xenophobic nationalism, which can equally explode in any of a number of ways. And we've also, had some, you know, well, the assassination of Iranian officials, is really is a provocative act of war.
Who in the world decided to do that?
What?
Who decided to do that? Trump?
I think we all know the answer to that. Our illustrious president.
President, yeah. Oh my goodness.
Um, and so in the midst of all of this, we were talking about the sort of self-fulfilling nature of the technological paradigm that that science and technology are used to pursue scientific and technical, more scientific and technical knowledge, which then, fuels the cycle. And so an additional problem in terms of taking responsibility, which is extremely serious, is that the amount of knowledge has expanded geometrically, right? And so specialization is, has become extremely common. So, sort of the ideal of the Renaissance scholar who kind of knows everything,
Yeah.
is gone. That doesn't exist anymore. Nobody knows everything, and the fact is that even experts in their fields don't know very much outside of their fields, and so almost everybody finds themselves in a silo. So first of all, there's too much to know, and it's unmanageable. And then, given that a lack of interconnections, there's the question of who's responsible. Is the answer is that no one's responsible.
Not
And
me anyway.
not me anyway, right? I mean, I just played a small role.
But
I only
do
did
you,
the detonator on that bomb.
yeah.
It's a very
Ron,
good detonator.
do you remember Desert Storm?
Yeah,
Is that the war between Iran and us? Desert
Desert
Storm.
Desert Storm was the first one. Uh, Desert Storm was the one under George H.W.
Yeah, I know.
But
I was working with the government contract, and
uh-huh,
I even got a medal. I mean, a pin for that. What we do is we procure all the stuff that the soldier use, like the boots and the food.
uh-huh,
They hire a lot of contractor for that. Like for the food is Oregon freeze dry. They, for the food of the soldiers, it
mm-hmm,
was in a it was in a container,
right,
that's already ready to eat.
yeah,
And then the boots and the helicopter, the ring for the helicopter, a whole bunch of stuff. And I was with that. I was with I was employed with the Office of Naval Research, is the Department of the Navy,
mm-hmm,
and we got a letter, and we got a pin that even though we didn't work out on the war, we still help procure and make the soldier safe because of all the stuff that they need. So in that case, so the the role of the people that that were hired, the companies and the people that we have to go out and inspect all of those products, to make
mm-hmm,
sure it's according to, you know, according to what I guess, I don't know. But anyway, I was wondering about that. now you mention all these people that included in decision making and stuff. I think I was like a part of that in a way, even so
Uh-huh. I mean, in some ways, we're all part of it, but
yeah,
but um,
yeah.
but
But I never thought, yeah,
the
I never,
the 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 decisions are in many ways made at the top. From what I know
yeah,
about Desert Storm, it's kind of so the immediate cause was that um, you know Iraq invaded Kuwait,
hmm,
and so
the
Saddam
US one,
Hussein had been an ally, right? He was a very valuable ally. We viewed Iran as a threat, and so we armed Iraq, provided them with chemical and biological weapons to use on the Iranians. There was an Iranian-Iraqi war in the
yeah,
70s and 80s, and so Saddam Hussein was a loyal ally, and but he also, was uh,
so why they killed them?
corrupt,
Yeah,
uh, power hungry, and so
yeah,
his understanding from his conversations with George H.W. is that the reward that he would get for really being a faithful American puppet
yeah.
was that he would get Kuwait.
Oh,
And so he took Kuwait. And so George H.W. was going to let that go, but his advisors kept insisting that he couldn't. And so the result was, Operation Desert Storm, and uh,
yeah.
someone who had been a perfectly good ally no longer is a good ally. In fact,
But
we
it's
attack
become
him,
an enemy. Yeah,
becomes an enemy,
yeah,
um, which is part of the danger of being a political operative. But um, in that whole thing, actually, less Desert Storm than subsequently is the uh, the tendency of the federal government to use contractors and outside organizations to provide essential services,
right.
not so much
Yeah,
in procurement, although that's an example of it, but for security, right? So those Trump pardoned those people who had been convicted of war crimes.
right. Yeah,
That tendency of outside third party security agencies to be particularly brutal, and to be particularly unqualified, and to be very, very well paid for it is a real ongoing tendency. They were heavily responsible for the um, Abu Ghraib um, violations of the Geneva Conventions, and the treatment of war prisoners, the war crimes against Afghanis, where they just shot down townspeople, which of course Trump pardoned and made it a federal offense to investigate any American uh, for war crimes, which kind of says something about Trump's character. But the point of this is, there's a very strong um, political economic connection. So the state as an entity is always closely connected to the economy, or to the economy as an entity. Um, so we have the problem of knowledge, and the problem of fragmentation of knowledge, which makes everything makes it very difficult for anyone, even if they want to take responsibility, because anyone's knowledge is such a small part of the whole, and their contribution becomes such a small part of the whole. And so we end up then with technology as God, which is really where we're at today.
Yeah.
So this technology success and science's success at solving problems creates the belief that it can solve all problems. So when that's the case, we don't need God, we don't need faith, we don't need prayer, we just need more technology, which of course is the thing that's gotten us into this morass in the first place. And so when technology is God, everything becomes an object for, technology to manipulate. The environment does, natural resources do, wildlife, plant life does, and people do. So there's a problem to be solved, and, it will be solved, and whatever the collateral damage may be, whether it's in human life and plant life and animal life and degradation of the planet, it's all simply collateral damage that's part of a solution.
Is there anything that the countries are doing to go and help rebuild some of the stuff that they've destroyed?
I mean, there are,
Like
there
on
are periodic, and sort of partial attempts. I remember in the Soviet Union, Lake Baikal was nearly dead. There was a major attempt to revive it, which was successful. I mean, there's been, a lot of work in Southern California to reduce the problem of smog, so it's no longer, as egregious. I mean, in driving in from the desert now, you aren't confronted by this gray wall you aren't confronted by an opaque gray wall.
well, COVID did that too.
COVID did that too. That's true. So I mean, so there are, and the Paris Climate Accord is sort of a major step forward, and the environmental movement has been, I think, in general in Europe, has been much more, has been received far more positively, and in Africa, there's been really greater support for preserving the natural environment, for preserving wildlife preserves, for taking action against poachers and people who violate the endangered species laws, and engage in the sale of animals and animal body parts, although it's still ongoing. But so
Yeah. Even our Jan at the church was able to get wells made. So that's awesome.
right,
She's,
right, right. Wells and access to water is extremely important. So there are a lot of side effects of this, the culture of waste. That's something that really, really bothers me, the way we think it's okay to waste. When I was in late grade school, I remember my mother accidentally put half a head of lettuce either in the vegetable keeper when she didn't keep vegetables there, or else in the back of the refrigerator and not in the vegetable keeper, but it spoiled. And when she found it and took it out, I remember just how angry she was at herself, how irate. I mean, she was really in a rage that she
Yeah.
had allowed half a head of lettuce to go to waste. And part of it was that we were poor, so half a head of lettuce was food.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
a
don't.
lot.
But the other thing is that simply wasting is a sin.
Mhm, mhm.
There are no two ways about it. Wasting is a sin. Allowing food to go to spoil because you don't pay adequate attention to it is sinful. And and then for me, I mean, saying grace and then not eating the food is like, I mean, come on, that's just flatly blasphemous.
Yeah.
You're thanking God for food, and then you're saying it's not good enough, so God didn't provide for me well enough. So you're thumbing your nose at God as if He's the servant.
I
So, so this culture of waste and disposability, and the more I can waste, the more affluent I am, and the better I am, is disgusting.
my mother never waste anything like the beans. She
Yeah,
put a full bunch of water. So well, because there's seven of us children.
yeah,
So, and my dad is the only one working. My mom
hmm,
is stay home mom, and so everything had to go long ways, right? Beans, or he make a hamburger soup with a potato, and he put a lot of broth on it with rice. So that's what we eat.
yeah,
Everybody can have a share.
right,
People
right.
that stop by always had a share too.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. That's in many ways that's kind of a funny thing about poor families, that
Yeah,
people coming by are welcome to eat,
Yeah.
yeah,
but often that's not the case with wealthier families.
no, yeah,
People coming by are not welcome to eat,
yeah.
and if they're welcome to eat, it's not not very
Well,
very
what?
much. I remember
Yeah,
I was invited out to dinner at my girlfriend's cousin's house. So they were two lawyers, and so there was like soup, right? And it's like a bowl with probably 4 spoons of soup,
yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't
and
have a second
and
either.
then
You
she
can't have a
comes
second.
and says, "Would you like more?" And she's nodding no.
Oh my.
Yeah, we used to have neighbors that comes like they smell the cooking of my mom. They'll come
Yeah.
to
Uh,
our house and said, "You think you can give us a little bit of that?" And my mom said, "Oh yeah, you have a little share." But we had like seven or eight of us here.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yep, remember those days.
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so compounding that is also, so as Christians, we should be voices to bring ethics and morality and a correct non-anthropocentric focus to the situation. But much of Christianity is in fact anthropocentric. We talked about Pope Benedict and his argument about the incorrect understanding of the creation story, contributing to Christianity being contributing rather than working to solve or mitigate the environmental crisis. When we see this as about dominion, when we see this as about ourselves, we become anthropocentric, and much of Christianity does that. So where does the hope come from?
What hope? Hope?
Well, I think one of the striking differences between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, so they both draw heavily on Romano Guardini.
Oh,
So in many ways, although they're depicted as kind of polar opposites, that's not really completely, that's not really true. I mean, clearly they disagree in some very major ways, and Pope Benedict is much more conservative, and Pope Francis is not. But in many ways, I think an underlying, I mean, the major underlying issue is that from Guardini, Pope Benedict has taken largely a negative vision, and from Guardini, Pope Francis, despite negative developments, has taken a positive vision. So the question then becomes, what are the sources of hope? Or where do we see sources of hope? Do we see sources of hope?
Well, I was going to say religion, gives us hope, but now that you use both of them as our example of, well, gee, I'm not sure.
For religion, I mean, so one of the things, well, so we're doing this class that in some sense is a source of hope. The Holy Father did his encyclical. For myself, personally, I mean, I've been a Darwinian since, I was in high school. So for me, the evidence is very clear that we evolved from apes. Until recently, I was reluctant to say that. Within a evangelical context, it's totally unacceptable to say that. Within a Catholic context, I was uncomfortable saying it, although I did, just not very loudly. But
Okay.
but that doesn't contradict. I mean, many Catholics are Darwinians. It's not a contradiction. What's important is, your understanding of creation and the creation story, and moving away from the literalism of Genesis to see Genesis as a creation story in which we're part of God's creation and that we're all interconnected to God's creation. And actually, ironically, in some ways, Darwinism does that. We clearly are interconnected to God's creation because we are part of the great ape family and have evolved from the great apes.
I was going to say, though, that really our hope is that number one, we were created in the image and likeness of God. So that's where our hope lies, as far as giving me a reason to stay connected with what my faith.
Uh-huh. The although the problem then is sort of the understanding of created in the image of God, given that so we are created in the image of God, but
As long as we follow,
in some sense, for many people, for many Christians, the the focus becomes on the reverse of that. So therefore, if we're created in the image of God, God bears our image,
no,
which is incorrect.
No, I don't believe that way.
No, you don't, but many people do.
Yeah.
So for example, the kind of very strict patriarchal view of everything, that men should dominate, that the husband has power over his wife, which is very, very
But that's not what the scripture was trying to say. I mean,
no.
yeah, we need to respect each other for different reasons, but anyway.
Right. I mean, right. I know that, but the problem is that many people interpret it that way, and you see it, especially in many evangelical marriages, that the man is the head and the
Right.
woman is this incidental, uh, and often the view is that the woman is placed there, created out of my rib, as it were,
Yeah,
to
that's what
please
I was
me
gonna say. They're
and
basing it upon that part of it.
serve me. But
self-serving.
but
then man is supposed to love their wife, yeah, and as they would,
and
as they,
and you're
yeah,
supposed to become one flesh.
right,
Yeah.
That means that you
that you respect each other
it means you respect each
for
other, that
different
you
strengths, and
work together
yeah,
for common ends, that you
yeah,
find a way to agree despite disagreements,
right,
that you reach unanimity of action, that you sacrifice yourself for the other,
mm-hmm,
that you give of yourself
mm-hmm,
and don't focus on what you're getting back.
that's right.
So it means you become one flesh. And that means you can't do that if you think you're better than, or you dominate, or you have all of these rights. But so uh, what I was sort of trying to say is that although that's that what's important is that as individual Catholics, that it's our responsibility to speak out, and to not be concerned, say, as I was with Darwinism, that I'm not quite saying the correct thing. Right? You have to speak out. You have to be a voice. And if you're speaking out incorrectly or wrongly, then you can learn and deal with that. But being silent isn't a very good option, given what's at stake. And also, the more silent we are, the less we learn. Right? Silence is not a good learning tool.
Well, I never really believed that I was from apes, so I guess I wasn't a Darwinist, but
That's fine.
yeah. So I just took the creation story, I guess, a little more literally. but yeah,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
you know,
that's that
obviously
that
as we get older, we're supposed to have our own opinions, but yeah,
I mean, it's fine to take it literally as well. You know, it was like the same thing
Yeah.
that I said with, you know, Hebrews and Matthew and the temple veil being torn. If you stop there,
Yeah, as
that's
long
a
as you go
problem.
deeper. Yeah,
If you go deeper,
yeah,
then it's not. I mean,
right.
so multiple interpretations are
Yeah,
always acceptable as long as one doesn't stop, you know, at
exactly. Yeah.
some untenable place. So um, there is, so, you know, in terms of our faith, I mean, we have excellent teaching from Pope Francis, we have excellent teaching from Pope Benedict. So, you know, the popes have certainly the last two, and even from
John Paul
John
II.
Paul II.
Yeah.
So the last three popes have really laid an excellent foundation
Mhm.
for us, and their message is, um, you know, really basically all their. It's an extension of the same message. There are no incompatibilities. So
Said somewhere in here that it evolves anyway.
yeah,
There's no final answer.
no, there's no final answer.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just a matter of what people will do, you know,
right,
if they read that.
right. I mean, the problems are really complex ones. The, this chapter, I think, at one point made the point that, you know, preserving the the rainforest in the Amazon is
Right.
really a critical priority. But you know, one of the solutions would we'll appoint an international commission, and it'll control what happens to the rainforest. But the problem is, you know, that frequently in those cases, it really becomes a case of kind of imperial plunder, where the wealthy nations try to exert their power to get what they want and to benefit at the expense of everybody else. And we also, you know, see that pattern everywhere. So the problem, and you know, and then he also raises, say, the issue of genetically modified food, and and you know, so on the one hand, he makes the point that most of the food that we eat today has been genetically modified, because genetic modification is a practice that, you know, evolved hundreds of years ago. Uh, you know, I think, like, you know, Grigor Mendel, who's an Augustinian monk, you know, with his pea experiments, was probably instrumental in beginning the process of genetic modification of food. And then, you know, we have
For that.
gra-
Wow.
graftings of trees to produce new species, and
Yeah.
you know, we have breeding of dogs to, you know, produce new dogs, or dogs with. I mean, all of that involves genetic modification. But so the question is, where are the limits? And you know, that's a major problem with genetic modification today. One is that, you know, genetically modified seeds are technically leased, right? So you pay for your crops.
Hmm.
You don't buy the seeds and plant, which is, you know, the old model. So the provider of the genetically modified seeds or whatever gets a cut of the proceeds, which is unprecedented. So that's a major problem. And then, you know, given the extent of
A lot, right, as feed for the animals,
yeah,
like corn, like the genetically modified corn for the chickens that
yeah,
produce the egg. Yeah.
yeah. And then, we don't, I mean, the extent of genetic modification has, and complexity has become so great that we don't know what its effect is. We're talking in many cases about much more major genetic modification. And the effects of it may not show up for generations. So, if it's
Mhm,
carcinogenic modifications,
mhm,
may not show up for more than a generation,
mhm,
which can be catastrophic. And it's also, there's, when you, and the problem is also that agriculture is becoming less diverse and more mono whatever. And so the diversity of products is disappearing, and we're beginning to have only one or two. So one tomato, one banana, where there used to be dozens or even hundreds, there's now one. That one appears to be immune to whatever, but it's never tested against everything. So when the one or two things that it isn't immune from, uh, affects it, then it wipes out the entire world's supply. That's happening now with bananas. So this is an extremely complex area in which we can contribute our voices as an ethical presence, because inherently capitalism has no ethics. They're brought from without. Politics has no ethics, as we can see today. They're brought from without. Most, social systems have no ethics. It's really, the privileged dominate and oppress the unprivileged. So in all of those cases, Christianity has an important role to play as a voice. And we also have, I think, an important role to play as a voice in breaking down anthropocentrism and, and sort of making it clear that that sort of anthropocentric view of dominion is not an acceptable one, making it clear that Christianity is not about us,
mhm,
and Christianity is not about me personally going to heaven.
mhm,
That's not at all the point.
mhm,
Christianity is about the kingdom of God being here.
mhm.
Jesus spoke of it as a real present presence. And that's our church's responsibility, our responsibility, our responsibility to try to save us from this morass that we've gotten ourselves into.
And I think it's sad that our ethics and moral life has been degraded so much, and that we're not allowed, or we're not, that that type of thing is not part of our system anymore. I mean, it's not the norm anymore in teaching our children, the ethics of morality, of what's right, what's wrong, the difference between right and wrong. There's a lot of stuff that's just brushed over, and now all the things that were wrong are now right, and all the things that were right are now wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It just messes everything up. Yeah. And I feel bad for the young ones that really are confused.
Yeah.
I mean, we've let everything go, all anything that we valued in life before, in teaching our children right. has gone out the window. Nobody cares anymore. And they don't want to take responsibility.
Yeah, this is a different generation.
Yeah,
Just so
it's really sad.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
And part of it is the whole religion thing. Nobody wants to listen to that anymore.
But they like that. The reasoning is they don't have time. They have work hard, or I don't know. But they can watch football all the time too.
Yeah,
uh,
they've got
well,
other gods.
a problem, is that also religion itself, although most Christians argue that they're, not morally relativistic, Christians tend to be very morally relativistic. They often have a set of standards that apply to themselves and a set of standards that apply to others. And
Well, it used to be that it was God, gave us what was right and what was wrong, and told us, and gave us leadership as well, gave us the basics, and we had to go by them as to what was right and wrong.
mhm,
And then we improvised on that. And if we improvised too much, we lost the point completely. But as a rule of thumb, you don't do any harm to anybody. You don't kill. You don't do anything that would
But displease God.
put anybody in jeopardy. Yeah. And God was still number one, but now we've
right,
got everything else taking up our what we think is important in life.
right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for many Christians, God has taken a subservient place. And I mean,
I was away from the church for 30 years, and and basically when I had the choice of making my own decisions, I was able to come back to the church. When everything else was falling apart, I was so glad to have the church where I needed them.
right,
And that's where I got my strength to move forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had that.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's true for me too. When after Vanessa died, I was really adrift until I had lunch with Father Ramon.
Mm. Yeah. So, I find that then I appreciated what I had, and I didn't realize I had it all the time.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, faith should be a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but the sad thing is, I mean, we're so at this point so separated,
Mm-hmm.
and and especially the element of that we create God in our image, sort of so the reverse. God created us in His image.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that we are God, or it doesn't even mean we're particularly like God. It means we are at the height of God's creation.
And we can lean on
But
Him when we need.
and we can lean on Him,
Yeah.
but also that it's about God. God should be
Mhm.
our focus. When God is our focus, then the world's problems tend to dissolve. Not that they
Mhm.
go away, but you can
No.
look at them in a different light. You know that
Mhm.
God is present, and in the midst of storm and in the midst of travail and in the midst of suffering, God will nevertheless be there
Mhm.
and somehow steady things.
Yeah.
If when we think it's all about us, it becomes, I mean, well, to begin with, everybody, all non-believers pick up on that immediately.
Mhm.
They, ironically, they expect much more out of us with good reason. And
Mhm.
when they don't see it, then they quite rightly condemn us.
Mhm.
But for many Christians, it's just become all about oneself, and with the extreme case being prosperity theology, that God, is going to bless me.
And I think too, with all the progress that man's made in the last 2 centuries, like it said in this chapter, um, I mean, there's been a lot of growth, and it's been so quick,
Hmm. Right,
and we do lose sight of who's in control.
right, right, right. And in many ways, is anybody in control? The internet
No,
has been
no, it's just God.
such a blessing, and yet it's an enormous curse.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
It's,
It can be
and
used in a bad way, and it is a blessing in a lot of other ways.
mhm.
So it's just,
It's made enormous amounts of wisdom and knowledge that were, previously virtually inaccessible,
mhm,
easily accessible.
mhm,
It's also made untruths easily accessible,
mhm.
and we see large numbers of people really believing in those untruths.
And that's
And
why we pray for wisdom to know the difference.
yeah, and although with cell phones, the internet isn't directly responsible, but cell phones have destroyed our ability to communicate with one another when they're supposed to enhance our ability to communicate with one another. So
Mm.
yeah, we find ourselves at a crossroads. I think we're out of time, and I think is there anything else about chapter 3 that you want to mention?
I don't think so. I think we really got in depth with it.
I think we've discussed it in a
Yeah.
fair level of depth.
There was a word that I didn't know what it was.
What is it?
Oli, oligopolis, police, oligopolies.
Where is it?
Page 102, up in the first chapter, or would you say 134, but near the end. In various countries, we see
Oligopolies.
oligopolies. Okay.
An oligopoly is just a large, mega organization.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So yeah, so we see
Yeah.
the production of crops in very few hands as opposed to, and they
Oh,
produce the same crops.
like
And
General Mills.
General Mills, right, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so next week then we'll do chapter 4,
Chapter
Okay.
integral ecology. So
It's
this
gonna be interesting.
draws on the elements of hope that the few of them that Pope Francis identified in the previous chapter, um, which actually we did make short shrift of. But one is ironically the lack of hope, the peace sense that many people are believing that that they don't really have a future, that we've reached some sort of crossroads. We see that in a whole number of ways. Even with
COVID, there's been a lot of that.
yeah, and even with people feeling they can no longer buy a house or a home, uh, and also resistance. It's been less common in the United States, but in South America there have been some major movements that have stopped uh, the expansion of mining, for example, and sort of other activities that would be ecologically degrading, because those activities are also not only exploitative of the environment, but also exploitative and oppressive of people. We're mining in
Blood
hazardous
diamond.
hazardous and unsafe conditions.
Yeah.
And so there are some signs of hope, and and a growing awareness that our planet is threatened, and so even some large corporations are trying to ensure that they have a zero carbon imprint by some time. So there's beginning to be a change. So we can begin to look at that next week.